Hello guys, I'm Alex, today from Battersea Power Station in London with the now retired Head of Product Safety Science Centre of Excellence of Givaudan. Neil Owen has managed teams providing complex fragrance analysis, specializing in chromatography, mass spectrometry and hyphenated techniques. It was this experience which led him to be one of those chosen to analyze approximately 60 samples of perfumes found in the debris field of the Titanic on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. How do you think fragrances smelled 100 years ago? Neil will tell us fascinating stories about this incredible discovery. Neil Owen, I'm very grateful. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to come along to something like this, which is a little different for me as well.
Nice. I hope you enjoy. You're a chemist and you've been working with the perfume industry for more than 30 years, right?
Yep.
What sparked your passion for perfumes and led you to work with Givaudan? How's everything began?
By accident, actually.
Oh, okay.
I never intended to come into the fragrance industry. More than 30 years ago now. It was a little bit like a happy accident. Mm-hmm. So before I worked in the perfume industry, I worked in the environment area. Mm-hmm. So I worked for what is now the Environment Agency. Mm-hmm. And before that, I actually worked for a contractor for the oil industry. Oh. But the common thing running through all of those jobs was that the techniques you use to characterise organic samples are interchangeable. So the fundamental technique you use is interchangeable. And I've always said that we went down to Ashford in Kent for me to work there with the view that I would stay 18 months and see how I got on. Well, 18 months turned into 30 years. So it's once you embed yourself in the fragrance industry, you suddenly realise that what to people on the outside just looks a very simple role, a very simple task. It's multifaceted. There are so many things that go into creating a perfume, and especially on the scientific side, on the analysis, on the technical side. There's so many different layers.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask you how chromatography, mass spectrometry, and hyphenated techniques work in the perfume industry.
No, chromatography has been used in the perfume industry almost since it became what you would call an industrial tool. Chromatography is designed to separate mixtures into their individual components, and once the fragrance industry realised that that was something that they could use from everything from quality control, so assessing how reliable the sample is or the fragrance is from batch to batch, through to the analysis of raw materials and understanding the composition, then it took off. And as it's become more and more developed and more mainstream, the fragrance industry has continued to embrace it, use it, develop it, do things with it that perhaps were never intended to be done before. And the addition of different detectors. So initially it was just a flame burning that as the sample comes through, the peak comes through. That's just a response for the material going through the column. That only gave you a qualitative response. You just knew there was something there. You couldn't tell what it was from that. But then mass spectrometry changed the field for everybody, because that allows you to investigate the nature of the molecule that you're seeing on the trace, and you can get structural information. But of course, what you can do then as well is you can reference that to the time at which you see it, and what we call the spectrum, the mass spectrum that you get from it, and then you can use that as a way of saying, have I seen this before? So run the same sample of different samples under the same conditions. Have I got the same peak? Yes. Have I got the same spectrum for that peak? Yes. that is that compound. And that's where you then start to build up much more in-depth, an in-depth picture of what that sample is made of, its constituents, its composition. And then of course you can start to say, right, well, is that the same as the sample over here? Is the sample over there? And you can start to then look at differences. And of course the big game changer was the introduction of computing. It's transformed the whole industry.
What about hyphenated techniques?
There are lots of things that you can hyphenate with GC and with mass spectrometry. You can even do GC NMR mass spectrometry if you really want to. But most of the hyphenated techniques are to do with the way in which the chromatography, the separation is undertaken in the column, and how you can adapt that to do different things. So you can do things like almost cut a section of the chromatogram out and send it to a different column and then to the detector, or you can do, as we've done for looking at fragrance allergens, you can do what they call two-dimensional gas chromatography. So that's using two columns linked, but they're linked by a device which allows you to subsample every 6 to 8 seconds and then pass that through onto a very small column with a very, very fast GC column. That then allows you, once you put it through all the wonderful computing systems that we now have, that allows you to put that back together again and produce what we call a two-dimensional gas chromatogram mass spectrum. So we as analysts are always trying to strive for good quality, separation, identification and measurement.
I've been always attracted by the Titanic tragedy because, despite it being a disaster, it's somehow a fascinating story full of interesting details. A year ago, an exhibition dedicated to the Titanic in Paris showcased many objects found in the wreck's excavations, including 62 precious vials of perfume. How were they found, and what's your work consisted of?
Okay. The vials were originally discovered by the RMS Titanic company. Now, they have the sole rights to the discovery around what they call the debris field. So nobody is allowed on the boat itself, on the ship itself, on the wreck. That's absolutely sacrosanct. It's not to be touched by anybody. But the debris field is when the ship broke up as it fell to the sea floor. All the things that were contained within it fell out of the boat, out of the ship, and they've been distributed over quite a wide area, but that's not seen as being disrespectful to the people that lost their lives on the ship on that night. So they regularly go down to the seabed and they collect artefacts off the seabed. And on the one dive in 2000, they saw these 3 leather pouches, what appeared to be leather pouches, on the seabed, and they grabbed all 3. Unfortunately, I believe they dropped one of the 3, so there are only 2 pouches that finally came up. They were the numbers right. And when they got them up to the boat, the sea level, clearly the first thing they realised was that they were in a poor state, but they were intact. But they could already smell the fragrance coming from the pouches, so they knew they had something a little different to the plates, the bottles, pieces of paper, clothing, etc. They wanted to know what they could do with it. They wanted to know what these were, what the potentially what was the background to them. Could they commercialise them? Because I mean, the RMS Titanic, it's a commercial company, and they have to pay for each of these dives. And even then, it was about $1 million per dive. So they have to keep on bringing things up and monetarising it. They took it around a number of fragrance houses, the idea of investigating what these were. And I suspect because of the background to the Titanic, people didn't want touch it, they didn't want to be associated with it.
Okay.
We took a slightly different view because it is history after all, and if it were fragrances, then it's something that we ought to have at least an interest in looking at and developing and seeing whether we could commercialise it, but just out of pure historical interest. So I believe Quest then approached the RMS Titanic group. So Quest is the forerunner to Givaudan. Quest were bought by Givaudan in 2006. We approached them. We entered into clear discussions about who owned what the deal was, what the process was going to be, and they gave us the green light to go and at least have a look at them. So my first exposure to them was early on in 2001, I believe, and the conservatory or the conservation of these materials and all the other materials took place just outside Detroit in North America, in this industrial lockup. And the reason why I'm smiling is that you would not expect that uniqueness to be inside this building. It looked just like any other industrial unit.
Okay.
And we went in, and we weren't allowed in much more than about 5 or 10 metres inside the building. And I said, wait here, there was a trestle table in front of us, and I said, wait here, we'll go and get them for you. And the conservation process was already taking place, so they had to leave them in water. So big plastic, like a sandwich box type tub, was taken out the fridge at the other end of the building, and literally within about 10 seconds the room was absolutely filled with a floral odour. And I looked at my colleague and I said, this is special. This is not some joke. You know, we found a little bottle of what's in it. This is really special. And they brought it down to us, and it was a really, really penetrating rose plus other floral notes to it.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you what that fragrances smell of. And, it was basically floral, rose.
Not all of them, no. But
okay. Any maybe rare ingredient? Any I don't know, special?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So we knew then that there was a lot of potential, but we couldn't touch the samples because the person in charge of the conservation, she had to work to US conservation legal guidelines.
Okay.
So even the RMS Titanic people couldn't touch anything. It had to go through the conservation process so that then people could handle it in normal 20th century conditions or 21st century conditions. So we looked as much as we could. I took a few photographs of the pouch and some pictures of the vials that were already loose from the pouches. And we came back and we worked up a proposal for the RMS Titanic group that we would subsample the samples. In other words, take a very small amount of sample. We weren't allowed to take the samples with us. We couldn't take any samples away from the conservation facility, so we had to...
You mean directly from the vials?
Yeah, so we would have to take a sample
just
directly,
a very small sample
from the vial, and take that away with us, because clearly the value, the monetary value of even one of these vials, with the known history that it's come from, the debris field of the Titanic, would have been absolutely enormous. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that wasn't going to happen. And they agreed to the whole process. So I then went back, probably about 3 or 4 months later, armed with a sampling kit and what we call a micro syringe. So we only take sort of 300 microliters, 0.3 of a mil. That was all I was going to take, and a large dose of hopefully luck that we could get into the sample vials. And to be fair, the conservator was concerned, but I went through the process I was going to apply, which I'm not going to share with anybody. That goes with me. Sorry. I went through the process I was going to undertake, and she said, yep, that's okay, and she agreed that there were going to be some samples that probably we would break. And she was happy with it. If we were going to start breaking everyone, we both agreed, no, halt, stop it. But if I could manage to get access to the samples and take the amount I needed and not damage the glass, then she was happy with that. And I ended up with 60 or 65 samples ultimately.
This must be such an amazing and, I don't know, exciting thing for you.
I mean, yes, I mean, the samples themselves, I mean, they are incredibly finely done. I mean, people talk about it being an opulent age. The way the bag and the samples fitted together and the way the samples were held inside the bag, I mean, it was all bespoke work. And actually, we managed to work out who made the pouches. And would you believe that company still exists in Leipzig? And if you go to any of the Titanic exhibitions, I believe that the bag you see, the perfume pouches that you see, were remade by this company in Leipzig, and they still have the design on the books.
The briefcase.
Yeah. Well, they were pouches about that big, about what, 20 centimeters long, and they folded over. And then inside, the samples were held in leather loops, and the samples were contained within two metal tubes, a bit like you know what I mean by rifle cartridge cases. Yeah. And each one sleeved over the other one, so you had to carefully, where it was the case, you had to carefully take them apart. You'd have the glass bottle inside. You could then take the glass bottle out, and then the stopper was a ground glass stopper, and it didn't stop there because the ground glass stopper was then designed with a dropper on the bottom. So you had the handle, the ground glass part, which is where it fits inside the glass sample bottle, and a very fine glass tube. So if you wanted to demonstrate what that sample smelled like, you would take it out and you would drop it on like a blotter, and then you could smell the sample.
Quite a modern idea, actually.
It is almost exactly what we do in the industry at the moment, yes. Which is slightly bizarre to think that 100 years later we're still doing the same thing.
The tragedy occurred on the night of 14th of April 1912, with the ship being lost 2 hours later, the 15th of April. At the time, the natural ingredients were the most commonly used in perfumery. But during the sample analysis, you found something really interesting.
So, we needed to characterise the samples as fully as possible. So that meant not only an analytical step, doing it by gas chromatography and spectrometry, but also by olfaction. So this meant each one needed to be assessed for its odour quality, its odour type, and its family type. And I used 2 really good people in the organisation. One was Dr. Robin Clary, who worked for me as a natural product specialist, and he was trained as a botanist. And the other person was Christopher Sheldrake, who is now an executive perfumer at Chanel, but who has a long history of perfume history, perfume knowledge, but also the role of natural oils in perfume development. So he was a perfect person to come and assess the samples. And so we spent a very happy afternoon locked in quite a large room in Ashford, just going through and smelling these things and exhausting ourselves basically. But we came away with some very useful information even before we'd done any analysis. And that was some of the fragrance family types. So there were a lot of florals there, but interestingly there were things like methyl salicylate, which is clearly a herbal, acetophenone, which is an ingredient or a raw material all on its own, so it's not a natural material. It is contained in natural oils, but not as a natural material in itself. Something in the industry that we call ionones, so you have a violet smell from them, vanilla, but then we also had things which were much more complex, and we couldn't put a single description to them, so we could only give it a description of all the notes that we could smell in there. One of the things that amazed us was there were a couple of lavenders, and we knew there was an English lavender there because we actually had the label for it. And when Chris Sheldrake smelt the lavender, he just sat there for a few minutes and went, "Wow, this is truly amazing," and said, "Honestly, this is better than any English lavender I can get hold of now." And this is almost 100 years later, after being on the bottom of the ocean, 2.5 miles down, all that time, and it's still perfect as a lavender.
Incredible.
Perfect conditions though for it. You know, we all need to store our perfumes 2.5 miles down and about -80 degrees centigrade. So we knew then we had something that was a whole range of different things. That wasn't just naturals. It wasn't just synthetics. It was what we called almost like a salesperson's portfolio. So it looked for all the world as though Adolphe Saalfeld was going to America to demonstrate that this is around the sort of the tipping point between all fragrances being natural to demonstrating that synthetics have a role to play in perfumery because they're more freely available. They'd be much cheaper than naturals in that time, and of course, there's issues around economy of scale as well. You can make many more in terms of quantity of these natural materials than you can get hold of natural oils. So you know we can only surmise that, but when we started doing the analysis as well, it became clear that there were one or two samples which had a combination of compounds that clearly looked like demonstration formula. And the one we chose originally to develop for a female fragrance composed inones, lavender, vanilla, and heliotropin. Now, heliotropin, to most people, will go, "Yeah, what's heliotropin? I don't know what heliotropin is." But if you know the smell of classical Nivea, the skin cream, the classical Nivea smell is due to heliotropin. And heliotropin was also used by Guerra a lot in their very early days to impart the soft notes in the fragrances. And I say with the inones as well, the inones are extremely powerful. And it was not necessarily challenging to come up with a composition. What was challenging was to take that composition and rework it for the 20th century in terms of what people like these days. And we had to really tone down the heliotropin and the inone level because they were far too powerful. But that actually made it to a sort of what I would call a semi-commercial fragrance, and it was sold at the RMS TITANIC Exhibitions for a few years. But sadly, it's no longer sold, which is a great pity, because it's nice to have something to bring to when you discuss these things with people, to bring it to people and go, it smells like this.
It would be nice to spray it and smell it.
And then on the male side, we were going to be doing a male fragrance around 2006, 2007, which is when Givaudan came along and bought us. And so it was not seen as mainstream commercial when you look at everything else that goes on in the world when you get bought by somebody. And that's just sort of petered away, unfortunately. But that was going to be a much more classic men's fragrance from around sort of the 1910 period. It would be really interesting. But yeah, there were some fascinating fragrances there. It's a pity that Adolphe Saalfeld has sort of got lost in perfume history. I mean, he's tied up in the history of the Titanic in terms of being survivor, but it left him a very, very different man. He wasn't anything like the man he was before the disaster, mainly because in the Edwardian and Georgian age, a man surviving that level of tragedy was not seen as being the dumb thing to do. basically, did you take the place of a woman or a child
Yeah,
in the
but
boat?
it was different back in the day. If the same happens nowadays, they will respect him anyway.
Yeah.
It's a human being.
Exactly. Yeah.
Men, women, it's
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I say, I think that aspect of it has probably overridden what he was trying to do, what he was trying to develop. And you can only surmise that where would he have gone with it? Where would he have taken that? Would he have been successful enough to have been a trailblazer for the perfume industry, an English based perfume company trailblazing into America? It was. There's all sorts of things that you can only surmise, you can only guess at.
Yeah.
But certainly the samples were really, really fine samples.
Okay, Neil, what's perfume for you?
That's an interesting question, and a very simple response is that I think if you ask that of anybody, you get a completely different response.
That's why I'm asking.
It's odd that when you've worked in the industry and you're exposed to fragrance to such an extent, you start to take a different view of it, and from a purely technical background, you start to think about the complexity of it and how it's built and how it works, how it operates, what it means to you as an individual, why you like wearing it. I like old fragrances, so I actually like wearing Mitsuko from Guerra, which is I think a 1920.
Fragrance, yes.
But it is a female fragrance. It was originally a female
it is
fragrance.
Unisex.
It's no. You
can wear. You can
yeah,
wear
but
whatever you want.
that's how tastes have changed.
Yes, I know.
In the last 100 years,
it is supposed to be feminine.
It was very much a feminine fragrance.
Yeah. But nowadays, everybody use whatever.
And then there are other ones I like. I mean, of course, I like the Givaudan fragrances. It goes without saying. I wear. I wear quite a few of the male fragrances. I do quite a lot of the what we sort of term the unisex fragrances, because I like sort of the combination of some of the floral and citrus notes. But weirdly, I also like some of the more unusual combinations of notes. So many years ago, a company called Demeter produced a fragrance called Dirt. Dirt. They were.
It doesn't sound very exciting.
They were unusual in that they had a purpose to change people's views on what a fragrance was.
Okay.
What does a fragrance do for you? And they had all sorts of obscure things. But Dirt was odd because it smelled like wet soil. And if the old phrase, if you've never tried it, you can't really comment on it. But it really was a really good fragrance.
So you really liked this one? Dirt.
I quite liked it, yes.
Yeah.
But
in general, you wear the perfumes only for you because you like them, or maybe you expect also to please others when you are wearing.
Yeah, there's I must admit, there's one. I do have one Tom Ford that my wife has actually said, "Don't wear that again, please." That's the way it goes.
I don't blame her.
But of course, the thing is, I now know I'm anosmic. In other words, I don't.
Okay.
There are certain things I don't smell.
Yeah.
So musk, take it or leave it. Doesn't bother me. I have difficulty smelling some musks. Quite a lot of musk actually. Sandalwoods, forget it. I cannot smell sandalwood.
You are anosmic for sandalwood.
Pretty much, yes.
That's a shame because it's so nice.
Yeah, I know. There's some of the woody ones I'm not very good at either. So I'm missing out on a whole world of things that are supposed to be dominant in male fragrances historically.
Okay. So, Neil Owen, thank you Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for your kindness, for your endless knowledge. You know, I'm a historian and an archaeology back in the day because I'm retired. But yeah, I always have this thing for the Titanic tragedy. And for me, it's such an honor to have you here, to learn from you from first hand about it. So happy to have had the opportunity to learn from you today. So I'm really grateful for you to be here with me.
Thanks for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure meeting you.
A pleasure.
Okay.
Finish!